My name is Harold Whitman, 72 from Charleston, and this is the story of how my own daughter tried to bury me alive in legal paperwork and how I made her dig her own hole instead. If you're watching this, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because I want to know how far the sound of justice can travel. This isn't a story about losing a house, it's about winning yourself back. Now listen closely, because it all started the night I heard my daughter whisper, "While I keep him busy with the toast, you call the locksmith and start the paperwork." That sentence hit me like a brick to the chest. It wasn't whispered in a dark alley or behind a closed door. It was said 2 feet away from me, over the hum of a jazz band and the clinking of champagne glasses. My daughter's voice, my own blood plotting me out of my home, while smiling at me across a dinner table decked with roses and gold candles. They thought I didn't hear. They thought 72 meant half deaf, half alive. I didn't flinch. I lifted my glass instead, let the champagne bubble against my lips, and smiled the same smile I used when Laura was 6, and tried to lie about breaking the neighbor's window. She never was good at hiding guilt. Her eyes always darted left, just like her mother's used to when she was nervous. This was supposed to be her night. 20 years of marriage. The restaurant was a place called the Indigo Room, one of those Southern-style places where every corner smells like butter and old wood. Laura and Eric had rented the entire back hall, crystal lights, string quartet, even a slideshow looping through photos of their perfect suburban life. And there I was, sitting at the head of their long oak table, like an honored relic from a museum. "Dad, you have to sit there," Laura had said earlier. "You're the reason we're all here." If only she knew how right she was. Eric raised his glass, the golden band of his wedding ring flashing under the light. He smiled at the crowd, bankers, realtors, neighbors, all of them laughing like they'd never lost a night's sleep. "To my wife," he said. "To 20 years of partnership and to many more together." People clapped. He looked like the kind of man who'd spent his life rehearsing sincerity in front of mirrors. Laura leaned in close to him, brushed her hand against his, and I saw her lips move again. I couldn't hear the words this time, but I didn't need to. Her eyes flicked toward me, then toward the phone she was sliding into her purse. That's when I noticed the folder under her chair, cream-colored, thick, the kind lawyers love. I've seen that kind of folder before, the kind that takes your name off a title deed. I kept my breathing even. The trick to surviving betrayal is to act like you haven't noticed the knife yet. Across from me, my niece Megan was laughing with one of Laura's friends, oblivious to the storm brewing 2 feet away. She'd flown in from Boston just to keep Uncle Harold company. Sweet girl. Smart too, but not the kind who sees traps until she's already stepped in one. A waiter came by to refill my glass. I thanked him, though my throat was dry. My hearing isn't what it used to be, but I'd caught every syllable of Laura's whisper earlier. "Start the paperwork." For a man who spent 40 years teaching English literature, words are never just words. They're clues. They tell you who people really are when they think you're not listening. Laura stood up for her toast, smiling that smile she used to give her students at open houses. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began. "Especially my father. Dad, you've been my rock, my moral compass, my hero, my hero." I nearly laughed. The words sounded rehearsed, like a line written to soften the blow of something much sharper. She went on talking about love, endurance, family, sacrifice. I counted the lies by the number of times Eric nodded beside her. The audience clapped again, oblivious to the theater unfolding in front of them. I looked down the long table, wine, laughter, a blur of smiles and silver cutlery, and thought, so this is how it happens. Not with shouting, not with rage, but with gentle music and flattery. I remembered something my late wife Evelyn once told me. When greed comes dressed as love, it's the most dangerous thing in the world. Laura had her mother's beauty, but none of her decency. I had raised her on books on truth, on kindness, and somehow she had learned none of it. The quartet shifted to a slow tune, Moon River, one of Evelyn's favorites. I felt my chest tighten. Laura walked around the table and kissed my cheek. Her perfume smelled expensive, sharp, synthetic. "You okay, Dad?" she asked, voice dripping with sugar. "Never better," I said. "It's a fine night for family." She smiled too quickly. Guilty people rush their smiles. Half an hour later, Eric excused himself. "Just need to step outside for a quick call," he said. He patted my shoulder as he passed like a man comforting an old friend. I watched him walk toward the exit, pull out his phone and stop just before the door. He didn't know the mirror behind the bar reflected everything. The way he leaned against the wall, dialed fast, whispered low. I could almost read his lips. Yes, it's him. The property. Start it tonight. I kept eating my salmon knife steady, heart steady. My wife used to say I could stay calm through a hurricane. She was right. Megan leaned over. "You okay, Uncle Harold? You look pale." "Just thinking," I said. "About what?" "About how quickly people forget who gave them everything." She frowned, but didn't ask more. She's kind that way. When Eric returned, Laura touched his hand under the table. She didn't notice I was watching. Her thumb traced small circles on his skin, the same nervous tic she had when she was young as a teenager. The rest of the evening blurred into laughter and speeches. Someone spilled wine. Someone else sang off-key. On the surface, it was perfect. Underneath, the air was heavy with something rotten. By dessert, I knew what I had to do. Not confront them, not yet. You don't storm a castle without first finding where the gates are. I waited until the plates were cleared, then stood up to make my own toast. My voice carried farther than I expected. The room fell quiet. To Laura and Eric, I said, raising my glass, "May your next 20 years bring you exactly what you've earned." Eric smiled. Laura beamed. Only Megan caught the weight of my words. We clinked glasses, and the crystal sound rang sharper than it should have, like thin ice cracking underfoot. When I left the restaurant, the night air was cool, so heavy from the nearby harbor. Charleston lights shimmered off the cobblestones. I paused by the street lamp, took one long breath, and let the mask slip. My hands trembled not from age, but from fury carefully contained. They were going after my home, the one I built after Evelyn died, the one I paid for with decades of teaching kids who never cared about poetry, but learned at least that words had consequences. And now, my own daughter was using those same words, paperwork, signatures, power of attorney, to erase me from the very deed I'd written my life upon. I walked the 3 blocks back to my truck, each step measured. Inside the cab, I sat for a moment, listening to the rain starting to fall, soft at first, then steady. "They think I'm done," I whispered to the dark. "They think I'm too old to fight." I started the engine, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The headlights cut through the mist like a promise. They're wrong. I still remember the morning Evelyn died. A late October Sunday, rain tapping the hospital window, like someone too polite to come in. She looked small against the white sheets, too small for a woman who had carried every burden of our lives with such quiet strength. Her hand in mine, her voice a whisper. "Promise me one thing, Harold. Don't let Laura grow up thinking money makes people happy." I promised. I meant it. But promises, I've learned, are only as strong as the people who keep them alive. When Evelyn passed, I was 52, a teacher with 30 years of poetry under my belt, a mortgage half paid, and a teenage daughter who thought grief was an inconvenience. The first 6 months were hell. Laura barely spoke. I barely slept. I buried myself in work. She buried herself in silence. We lived on autopilot, breakfasts eaten without words, nights spent in separate rooms. It was Linda Porter, my neighbor, who first knocked on my door. She'd been living next door for as long as I could remember, widowed, early a retired librarian, with a laugh that carried through the azaleas. "You can't let the house die with her," she said, pointing at my front yard, where Evelyn's roses were wilting. "Get your hands dirty again, Harold." That's what she'd want. So I did. Every evening after work, I'd kneel in that yard and prune plant water. I didn't know a damn thing about gardening, but I learned, slowly, painfully. The thorns cut through my gloves, but the pain helped. It reminded me I was still alive. By spring, the roses bloomed again, blush pink, Evelyn's favorite. That house became my anchor. I'd bought it at 38, back when life felt long and secure. It wasn't much, a small colonial, near the marshes, peeling paint, squeaky floors, but it was ours. Every nail, every plank, every coat of paint told our story. I refinished the porch myself, rewired the lights, built Laura a swing in the backyard with my own hands. When she was little, she'd run barefoot through those halls, hair flying, laughing so loud the whole street could hear. She'd climb onto my lap while I graded essays and ask Dad, "What's a metaphor?" I'd tell her, "A metaphor is when words pretend to be something else so they can tell the truth." She loved that. She used to say, "Then maybe I'm a metaphor too, 'cause I want to be like Mom, but I'm still me." God, she had Evelyn's spirit back then. But time changes people. Money changes them faster. When Laura turned 16, she started talking about moving up. She wanted designer clothes, a better car, a life that didn't look like ours. I told her there's dignity and modesty, but she only rolled her eyes. Dignity doesn't pay for college, Dad. She was right in a way. So I worked overtime, taught summer classes, saved every dollar. When she graduated, she got a scholarship to study business. I was proud, prouder than words could say. But the girl who came home 4 years later wasn't the same one I had raised. She'd traded paperback novels for real estate listings. She spoke in numbers, not feelings. Every sentence had a price tag. She looked at the house one evening and said, "You should sell it, Dad. You could get $500,000 now. Live somewhere easier, smaller. Let the money work for you." I laughed, then lightly, maybe too sharply. "Laura, that house is my work. Every board in it is my labor. Letting go of it would be like selling a chapter of my own life." She sighed. "That's not how the world works anymore." And that's when I realized something had cracked between us. Not broken yet, but cracked like ice before it splits. Linda noticed it before I did. She always did. "You two used to talk for hours," she told me one evening over tea. "Now you just talk at each other." "She's busy," I said. "She's lost," Linda corrected. "And you're letting her stay lost because you don't want to admit it." Maybe she was right. Maybe I kept hoping time would heal it, that the little girl who once read To Kill a Mockingbird on my lap would return. But she never did. She married Eric a few years later, a man with a smile too smooth and eyes that never stayed still. He sold insurance, then stocks, then dreams. I didn't like him, but Laura was happy, or at least determined to look like she was. At their wedding, she hugged me and said, "You'll see, Dad. Eric's got plans. Big ones. Plans. That word again. Evelyn once said men like Eric build castles in the air and expect women to live in them. They bought a fancy house with a big mortgage. When things got tough, they borrowed first from the bank, then from me, just a loans, she'd say, kissing my cheek. We'll pay you back soon. But soon never came. I didn't mind at first. That's what fathers do, right? They help. They believe, even when belief feels foolish. But something changed the day she called the house an asset. Not a home, not a memory. An asset. That word cut deeper than I expected. I looked around that night, the creaky staircase, the family photos, Evelyn's roses outside, and realized how fragile it all was. I'd spent my life teaching young people about integrity, about how words reveal character. Yet somehow, I'd failed to teach my own daughter the same. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house had weathered hurricanes, termites, even my clumsy attempts at repair, but it couldn't withstand the slow erosion of greed. Linda came by often during those years, usually carrying pie or advice I didn't ask for. "You're too generous," she'd say. "Laura's a good girl, but she's testing how far you'll bend." I told her, "She's my daughter. And that's exactly why she knows you'll never break," Linda replied. She was wrong about that part. Because on the night of that anniversary dinner, when I heard Laura whisper about paperwork and transfers, something inside me finally did break. Not the way wood cracks under pressure, loud and final, but quietly, like a bridge giving way in the dark. Maybe I taught her to read. Maybe I filled her head with stories about courage and compassion. But somewhere along the way, I failed to teach her what words like honesty meant. I didn't sleep that night. The jazz from the restaurant still echoed in my ears, looping between the laughter and Laura's whisper, "Start the paperwork." Some phrases stick in your mind like a bad melody. That one stayed. By midnight, I was sitting at my kitchen table, the house quiet except for the ticking of the old clock above the stove. The air smelled faintly of roses. I'd brought in a few from the garden that morning. They'd started to wilt. Maybe everything does when you stop paying attention long enough. I opened the old oak drawer where I kept the property deeds, wills, insurance papers, all the bones of my life, in a single folder marked Whitman Residence, 1986 to present. I hadn't touched it in years. My lawyer, God rest his soul, had told me once, "Keep it simple, Harold. Keep it safe." So I did. The first few pages were exactly as I remembered: purchase deed, mortgage release, tax records. But near the back, between the insurance copies and an old appraisal, I found something new. A document I didn't remember signing. Transfer of ownership. My name was there in black ink. My address. My date of birth. And below it, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. My signature slopes right, always has. This one slanted left, too neat, too deliberate. The H was wrong. The loop didn't close. It was like someone had practiced it from memory, not muscle. My hands went cold. The notary stamp said it had been filed 3 days before the anniversary dinner. The witness line was blank. The transferee's name, Eric Jordan. I sat there for a long time, staring at the paper under the yellow lamplight, feeling the kind of nausea you don't get from sickness, only from betrayal. By 2 in the morning, I'd made a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and was pacing the living room. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like judgment. I needed help. Not the kind that came with pity, but the kind that came with experience. At 6 sharp, just as the sun cracked through the blinds, I walked next door and knocked on Linda Porter's door. She answered in her robe, hair in curlers, holding her first cup of tea like a shield. "Harold Whitman," she said, squinting. "It's barely dawn. Is someone dead, or are you just restless?" "Both, maybe," I said, handing her the folder. "I think someone's trying to steal my house." She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing until she'd read the entire document twice. Then she lowered her glasses and muttered, "That son of a—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. "This isn't your signature," she said firmly. "I know. And this date 3 days ago, before the party." "Exactly." Linda set the papers down on the counter, her expression sharpening like glass. "You need to verify this with the county clerk. If it's filed, it's public record. If it is still pending, you might have time to stop it before it's recorded." I nodded already halfway to the door. Charleston County Clerk's office opens at 8. I was there by 7:30, the first in line, a stack of documents under my arm, and caffeine replacing blood in my veins. When the clerk finally called my name, I slid the forged document across the counter. "I need to know if this has been filed," I said. She typed something into her computer fingers, clicking like little hammers. "Let's see. Whitman Herald. Property at 2846 Riverbend Road. Yes." Her brow furrowed. "There's a transfer request pending. Submitted electronically by a firm called Lowcountry Realty Services, waiting for notary verification before final filing." I exhaled long and slow. "Still pending. Not final yet. Can I get a copy of the submission details? You can request one under property verification law," she said. "But only as the legal owner." "I am the legal owner." Her eyes flicked from me to the document. "Then you'll want to get that signature verified by the sheriff's department. If it's a forgery, they can freeze the transfer immediately." I thanked her, left, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy who met me was young, too young to understand how much a house can mean to a man who's buried a wife and raised a child inside it. But he was professional enough to care. He took one look at the document and said, "Sir, whoever did this knew what they were doing. The font, the layout, it's identical to a legitimate deed transfer. But the ink's fresh, and that signature." He paused. "We can send it for forensic comparison if you'd like." I would. When I got home, Linda was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "I called in a favor," she said. "My nephew works in real estate. He knows that firm, Lowcountry Realty. Says they've been flagged before for shady transactions. Guess who they've been working with lately, Eric?" I said. "Bingo." She handed me a printout of a local real estate listing. There it was, plain as day. "Pending property transfer, private family trust, Jordan Whitman estate." Estate, I repeated. The word made my stomach turn. "They're planning to call you legally incapacitated," Linda said quietly. "You're worth more to them on paper than in person." For a long time I didn't say a word. I just stared out across the yard toward Evelyn's roses swaying in the morning breeze. She'd planted those the spring after Laura was born. All this time I'd believed love was enough protection. That blood meant loyalty, that family meant something sacred. But blood can rust. That afternoon, I locked every drawer, every cabinet, every box of memories I owned. I photocopied every document, stored copies at the bank, and hid one in the attic. I didn't tell Laura. I didn't call Eric. Instead, I started a journal. Notes, names, dates, every detail of what they'd done. I knew from decades of teaching that truth has a way of revealing itself when it's written down. By nightfall, I sat again at my kitchen table, the same chair where I'd first found the forgery, the same fading light falling across the papers. The clock ticked softly, unbothered by the wreckage of trust around it. Somewhere, I heard the faint buzz of my phone. A message from Laura Hope. "You got home safe, Dad. Love you." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because love shouldn't sound like strategy. I folded the forged deed carefully and slipped it back into the folder, labeling it with a single word in black ink, proof. That night I realized betrayal doesn't always come with a knife. Sometimes it comes with a pen. It started with phone calls. Soft, gentle ones, the kind that sound like care, but smell like control. "Dad, how have you been sleeping lately? Have you been eating enough greens? Do you ever get confused when you drive?" The first few I answered patiently. By the fifth, I started counting how many ways someone could weaponize concern. Laura had changed her tone completely. Gone was the sharp edge of business talk, the cold certainty that had replaced her mother's warmth. Now she sounded like a nurse from a retirement ad, every word dipped in honey. I knew the taste too well. It's what Evelyn used to call guilt seasoning. When people want something ugly from you, they coat it with sweetness first. The first Sunday after the anniversary dinner, she showed up at my doorstep, arms full of groceries. "I thought I'd cook for you," she said, smiling like a stranger who had memorized her lines. I let her in. She moved through this kitchen like she owned it, put the milk in the wrong fridge shelf, rearranged my spicy recipes, tossed out the bread I'd baked 2 days before. "I'll buy you fresh," she said. "Whole grains better for your heart." I watched her bustle around, pretending everything was fine. I could almost believe it, if not for the way her eyes scanned the counters, the table, the folders. I'd carefully moved out of sight. So she said, chopping onions too forcefully, "Eric and I have been talking. We think it might be good for you to stay with us for a while." "Why?" I asked. "Well, the house is a lot for you to manage, and I worry." "You worry?" "Yes, Dad. You're 72. It's normal." Normal. That word stung worse than any insult. "I'm 72, not senile," I said calmly. "I didn't mean I know exactly what you meant." She smiled tightly. "Just think about it. Okay. It'd be nice. You'd see the kids every day. No more climbing those stairs." I nodded like a man considering mercy. "I'll think about it." When she left, the house smelled of rosemary and deceit. 2 days later, she called again. "I booked an appointment with Dr. Lowe for you," she said. "I didn't ask for that. It's just a checkup, Dad. Routine. You haven't seen him in over a year." Dr. Henry Lowe had been our family physician for 2 decades, a kind man in his 60s with tired eyes and more patience than most saints. Evelyn used to bake him peach cobbler every Christmas. If anyone could see through a lie, it was him. The next afternoon, I sat in his office while Laura hovered near the door, pretending to read a magazine. "How have you been, Harold?" he asked. "Better than I look." He smiled. "You always were honest. What brings you in today?" "Apparently," I said, glancing at Laura. "I'm falling apart." She looked up, startled. "Dad, that's not fair. I just wanted to make sure I'm still functional," I finished. "Doctor." Lowe cleared his throat. "Well, we'll take a look anyway." He ran through the usual blood pressure reflexes, a few memory tests. I passed every one. When he asked me to recall a list of 5 words, I gave him 8. When he finished, he looked at me with quiet understanding. "Your daughter worries," he said gently. "She worries about my mind, not my health," I replied. "She's hoping for a diagnosis that can be notarized." Dr. Lowe's eyes flicked briefly toward the doorway, where Laura was pretending to text. "I see," he murmured. An hour later, after Laura had gone to the parking lot to make a quick call, he leaned across the desk. "She asked me to sign a preliminary evaluation form," he said softly. "Said you've been forgetful, disoriented, that you repeated stories." And I refused. He folded his hands. "She's trying to establish medical grounds for temporary conservatorship. It starts small, a note here, a concern there. Then comes the petition." I nodded. I already knew. I just needed to hear it from someone else. "Do you have proof she asked for that?" I asked. "I keep records of all requests," he said. "If this escalates, I'll testify." I shook his hand. "Thank you, Henry. You were always a better doctor than most people deserve." When I walked out of that clinic, the sun was blinding. Laura stood by her car, smiling, waving. "Well," she asked. "How did it go?" "Perfectly," I said. "Doctor says I'm in excellent shape. You'll be disappointed." Her smile froze just a little. That evening, Eric called. His tone was soft, sympathetic, like a man rehearsing empathy. "Harold, my man, how are you holding up? Heard Laura took you to the doctor." "You heard that, Fest. You know how wives are." He chuckled. "They care too much. She just wants what's best for you." "I'm sure she does," I said flatly. He hesitated before continuing. Look, while we're on the subject, there's a lawyer I know who helps families with estate planning. Good man, very discreet. Maybe you should talk to him, just to make things easier, in case you know something happens down the line. Something like what? Well, nobody lives forever, Harold. We're just trying to protect your future. Protect your future. Another phrase dipped in honey and cyanide. I let him talk, until his own lies tangled, then ended the call with thanks, Eric. I'll take care of my future the same way I took care of everything else myself. That night, I sat on the porch with Linda. The air was heavy, thick with summer heat, and the smell of cut grass. They're circling, I said quietly. She handed me a glass of sweet tea. So circle back harder. I smiled at that. Linda had always known when to cut sentiment with steel. They'll try again, I said. Then you'd better be ready. Oh, I'm ready, I said, watching the porch light flicker across the lawn. They think they're playing chess with an old man. But I taught literature for 40 years. I know every trick of persuasion, every plot twist. She laughed softly. You always loved your metaphors. They're useful, I said, especially when the story turns ugly. Inside the house, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Laura, Dad. I'm glad you're okay. Please think about moving in with us. It's safer, we love you. I typed a reply, then deleted it before hitting send. Instead, I turned off the porch light and let the darkness settle around me. I'd spent my life teaching people to see beneath the surface of words. Now it was time to use that skill for myself. I smiled at their concern the same way a soldier smiles at the enemy, who forgot he's still holding the gun. The next morning, I called the only person Evelyn ever said she trusted with a secret, Ann Keller. Ann had been her college roommate, and later one of Charleston's sharpest estate attorneys. She was 55 now, silver hair cut short, always dressed in black suits that looked like they could smell dishonesty before she did. When I told her what had happened, she didn't gasp. She didn't even blink. She just took off her glasses, leaned back in her chair, and said quietly, I was wondering when they'd try something like this. I frowned. You knew? Not exactly. But I've seen it too many times. Families who call love an investment and expect a return before you were even gone. She stood up and began pacing, saying, You have two options, Harold. Fight it head on, which gives them warning, or disappear in plain sight. I'm listening. We'll create a living trust. You transfer your home and all assets into it. You'll still control everything, accounts, decisions, property, but legally, it won't look like yours. So if they file for conservatorship or try to seize ownership, there'll be nothing to take. I exhaled slowly. So it's invisible. Legally speaking, she smiled. It's a ghost. I looked around her office, the wall of law books, the photo of her with Evelyn in their 20s. She always said you could outthink the devil himself, I said. Anne grinned. Your wife was half right. I just know how devils file paperwork. By the following week, the trust was formed, the Whitman Living Trust, with me as both trustee and beneficiary. Every detail was airtight. Anne walked me through it line by line, her tone patient but firm like a teacher, schooling a student on survival. Next came the hard part. I had to sell the house. That house had held 40 years of laughter and ghosts. Every wall carried Evelyn's laughter, every floorboard her footsteps. I stood in the hallway one last time, the afternoon light spilling across the hardwood, and whispered, It's time to let you rest. Linda helped me pack. She didn't ask questions, though her eyes watered when we reached the box, labeled Evelyn's things. You're doing the right thing, she said. You can't fight fire with sentiment. I know, I said, but it still burns. Anne handled the sale through a private buyer she trusted, a retired couple from Virginia who'd fallen in love with the garden. The deal closed in 3 weeks. The money after taxes and fees totaled just over $430,000. Anne helped me split it into 3 separate accounts: a long-term investment fund under the trust, a liquid emergency account accessible only in person with 2-factor verification, and a private checking account in a new bank under a corporate entity tied to the trust. All of it legal, she said, sealing the folder. All of it untouchable. When we were done, she leaned forward. "Harold, one more thing. If they suspect you know what they're doing, they'll escalate. Let them think you're getting tired, maybe a little forgetful. It'll make the fall sweeter." I nodded. "You want me to play the old man?" "Exactly," she said. "Make them underestimate you. That's how you win." So I did. Over the next few weeks, I started leaving half-finished coffee cups around the house when Laura visited. I forgot appointments she'd made for me. I even called her once by my brother's name, just to watch her eyes light up with greedy relief. "Dad," she said softly, "I think maybe you're working yourself too hard. Why don't you let us handle your bills for a while?" I smiled. "Maybe you're right, honey. Maybe I'm slowing down." She squeezed my hand, the perfect daughter in a perfect lie. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll take care of everything." That same night, I logged into my accounts, triple-checked every password, and printed out the trust papers. Then I placed a single note on top, for my attorney's eyes only in the event of any claim against my mental state. The next morning, Eric stopped by just to chat. He carried 2 coffees and a smile that could have sold guilt to a priest. "You've been on Laura's mind, Harold. She's worried." "We both are." "That's kind of you," I said. "I've been worried about you too." "Me?" He laughed nervously. "Yeah. About how you'll pay the mortgage when this all collapses." His smile froze. "I'm sorry." "Nothing," I said. "Just thinking out loud." He left 15 minutes later, still smiling, but I could see the flicker of panic behind his eyes, like a magician who'd just realized his trick wasn't working. 2 days later, I moved into my new place, a small condo overlooking the Charleston Bay. White walls, simple furniture, a narrow balcony with a view of the sea. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I sat out there the first evening with a glass of whiskey and listened to the waves. It was the first quiet I'd had in months. No pretending, no manipulation, just the sound of wind and salt and my own heartbeat. Linda visited a week later. "So this is the new fortress," she said, stepping inside. "Nice view." "It's freedom," I said. "A little smaller, but it fits." "Like a suit you actually chose yourself," she teased. We shared a drink, and for the first time in a long while, I laughed, a real unguarded laugh. "Do you think they'll find out?" she asked. "Oh, they will," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But by the time they do, they'll be standing on air." That night, Laura texted me again. "Dad, I've been thinking maybe we could help you with your finance. Eric can set up an investment account in your name. It'd make everything easier." I typed a reply slowly. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything's already taken care of." I hit send, turned off my phone, and let the city lights shimmer over the water. They thought they were building my cage, but I'd already built the lock and kept the key. They were writing my ending. I was already editing theirs. It happened on a Wednesday night, just after 10. The kind of night when Charleston feels too still, the air heavy with humidity and secrets. I was sitting on my balcony, a half-empty glass of bourbon in my hand, watching the lights shimmer across the harbor, when my phone started ringing. Laura. I knew before I picked up. Something had cracked. "Dad," she said, breathless, her voice sharp and trembling. "Tell me you didn't." I took a slow sip. "Didn't what?" "Don't play dumb with me. Eric went by the house today, our house, and there were people there. Strangers. They said they bought it. From you." I let the silence stretch until it hurt. The sea breeze carried the sound of distant traffic, the world moving on, as my daughter's voice shook through the line. Yes, I said finally. I sold it. What do you mean you sold it? She snapped. You can't do that without telling us. I didn't need to tell you, I said. Because it was mine to sell. There was a pause, one of those hollow pauses where you can almost hear a person's belief collapsing. When she spoke again, her voice was colder. You're joking. Please tell me you're joking. I'm not. Dad. That house was supposed to stay in the family. We talked about it. You promised. I never promised you my house. Laura, I said. I promised you my love. And you decided that wasn't enough. She made a choked sound, half anger, half disbelief. How could you do this? After everything you know, Eric was handling the paperwork. Oh, I know, I said. Believe me. I know exactly what paperwork he was handling. The line went dead quiet. I could almost feel her blood run cold on the other end. Who told you? She whispered. Nobody had to tell me, I said. I read the documents, the forged signature, the fake notary, the transfer forms. You weren't even careful, Laura. She gasped. Dad, that's not Eric must have. I didn't. Don't I cut in? Don't finish that sentence. You'll just add another lie to the pile. There was a sound of chair scraping, or maybe her hand hitting the counter. When she spoke again, she'd found her anger again, sharp and bitter. You had no right. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've humiliated us. Do you know what this looks like? You're making me look like a fool. I laughed once quietly. You don't need my help with that. Don't you dare to do me like that. I stood up, walked back inside, closed the balcony door behind me. The bourbon glass trembled slightly in my hand. You spent months planning to erase me, Laura. You called it concern. You forged my name and told people I wasn't well. You wanted my home, my money, my peace. And now you're angry because I took away the thing you were stealing. She was crying now. Angry tears, sharp and self-pitying. You're paranoid. This isn't you, Dad. You're not thinking straight. Oh, I'm thinking clearer than I have in years, I said. For the first time, I'm not the one being played. There was another voice in the background, Eric. Faint, but I could make it out. What's he saying? Put it on speaker. Laura must have done it, because the next thing I heard was his smooth, oily tone. Harold, buddy. Let's calm down, okay? You've made a big mistake, but we can fix this. A mistake, I said. You mean selling the house that was mine before you could steal it? That's not fair, Harold, Eric said quickly. We were just trying to organize things, make sure your assets were managed properly. Laura was worried about you. Funny, I said, because I was worried about you too. Especially your debt collectors. Silence. You've been busy, I continued. I talked to the county clerk, the sheriff, even the bank. You used my address on 3 loan applications. You thought I wouldn't find out. Eric's voice hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do. The problem is, you don't know who you're dealing with. You thought I was an old man asleep at the wheel. But I was awake the whole time. Laura broke in again, her voice cracking. Why are you doing this to us? We're family. Family, I said softly. You stood in front of me, smiled, and plotted to take everything I owned. That's not family, Laura. That's fraud with better manners. She sobbed, then real tears maybe, or just rage that had nowhere else to go. I was trying to protect you, she said. No, I said, my voice steady. You were trying to own me. There's a difference. For a long moment, none of us saw you. The only sound was the wind outside, pushing against the window pane, like it wanted to listen in. Finally, Laura said, voice small. Where are you? Home, I said. "That's not your home," she snapped. "It is now." She let out a strangled laugh. Disbelief, fury, maybe both. "You'll regret this, Dad. You don't know what you've started." "Maybe," I said. "But I know how it ends." Then I hung up. I set the phone down on the table and stood there breathing slowly. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. The tide outside had turned. I could hear the waves pulling back, strong and sure, washing away whatever came before. I poured the last of the bourbon, raised it toward the dark window, and said quietly, to Evelyn, "You'd have been proud of this one." And for the first time, my daughter sounded like a stranger arguing with a bank teller, not with her father. They came for me in the daylight this time. No whispers, no sweet smiles, just legal papers. A man in a cheap suit showed up at my condo, eyes avoiding mine, as he handed me a thick envelope. "Mr. Whitman, you've been served." Inside, petition for temporary conservatorship, filed by Laura Whitman and Eric Daniels, alleging diminished capacity, erratic behavior, and financial recklessness. I sat there for a long minute, reading each word slowly, the way a man reads his own obituary. Then I smiled. They had finally made their move. 2 days later, I walked into Ann Keller's office. She took one look at the papers and exhaled long and low. "They really did it," she said. "They had to," I replied. "They're cornered rats biting, so all they have left." Anne skimmed the pages, eyebrows tightening. "They claim you're showing early cognitive decline, paranoia, and confusion. They've attached a statement from Dr. Henry Lowe." I froze. "Henry," she held up a finger. "Before you get angry, I already called him." A few minutes later, Dr. Lowe himself walked through her door, coat still on, eyes weary but steady. "Harold," he said, "they came to me last week. Tried to bribe me to sign a letter saying you were showing signs of dementia. I refused. Then how they forged my signature," he said. "This statement isn't mine. The date doesn't even match my patient logs." Anne's jaw tightened. "Good. That's falsification of evidence. We can use it." Dr. Lowe nodded. "And for the record, I'll testify you are sharper than half the doctors at the hospital." The hearing was set for the following Friday. Family court, downtown Charleston. The place smelled of paper polish and people pretending to care. Laura sat across the aisle from me, all dressed in beige, the color of moral superiority. Eric beside her, smug in a navy suit that fit too well for an honest man. Their lawyer, Richard Sterling, looked like he'd sold more souls than case. Anne whispered beside me, calm and focused. "Remember, let them talk first. Lies unravel fastest when they're not interrupted." Judge Evelyn Monroe entered, late 60s, steel-gray hair, eyes sharp as glass. She'd seen every kind of family betrayal imaginable. You could tell. Sterling stood first. "Your Honor, we are here out of deep concern for Mr. Whitman. He has displayed alarming confusion, paranoia, and financial instability. He sold his longtime family home under suspicious circumstances and has isolated himself from his only daughter." He gestured toward Laura, who lowered her head in a performance of quiet grief. "She has tried tirelessly to care for her father, but his erratic decisions and the influence of third parties have made that impossible. We request temporary conservatorship for his safety and the protection of his estate." Judge Monroe turned to me. "Mr. Whitman, do you understand what's being requested here?" "I do, Your Honor," I said. My voice was calm. "My daughter is asking to legally own me." A ripple of murmurs moved through the courtroom. Sterling raised his hand. "Objection. Sustained," the judge said quickly, though her lips twitched. Anne rose smoothly. "Your Honor, before I address their claims, may I call our first witness, Dr. Henry Lowe?" The doctor took the stand, swore in, and met the judge's eyes directly. "Dr. Lowe." Anne began. Did you write or sign this statement attached to the petition? He glanced at the page and shook his head. Absolutely not. Is that your signature? No. It's a poor forgery. The handwriting's wrong and the letterhead hasn't been used by my office in 5 years. Did anyone approach you about writing such a statement? Yes. Ms. Laura Whitman and her husband, Eric Daniels. Sterling jumped up. Objection, hearsay. Didn't flinch. It's not hearsay when it's the witness recounting direct interaction, counselor. Do you need me to say so the statute? The judge raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. The objection is overruled. Dr. Lowe continued. They offered a donation to my practice if I'd write that Harold was showing memory decline. I refused. 2 days later, this letter appeared attached to a court filing. The judge leaned forward. Are you saying this document was falsified? Yes, Your Honor. A gasp moved through the room. Laura's face drained of color. Anne didn't stop. Dr. Lowe, in your professional opinion, is my client mentally fit to manage his own affairs? He smiled faintly. I'd trust Harold Whitman to run a hospital, Your Honor. His mind's as sharp as it ever was. Sterling scrambled to recover. Your Honor, we have other witnesses, neighbors, acquaintances who have noticed troubling behavior. Proceed, the judge said. A woman took the stand, mid-40s, nervous. I saw Mr. Whitman walking around his old neighborhood late at night once. He looked exhausted. Anne stood. And you are I'm a friend of Laura's. Not a neighbor. Well, no. I live in North Charleston. Then how exactly did you see him walking near his home at 11 p.m.? The woman froze. Sterling's jaw clenched. Anne smiled politely. No further questions. 2 more witnesses followed, one claiming I'd shouted at the grocery clerk, another that I'd left my car running outside a pharmacy. Both stories fell apart under Anne's calm precision. Receipts, security footage, timestamps, she had everything. By the time she was done, their credibility lay in tatters. Then it was my turn. I took the stand. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Anne asked gently, Mr. Whitman, can you tell the court why you sold your home? Yes, I said. Because I discovered my daughter and her husband forged documents to take it from me. I have evidence of the falsified deed transfer, and I have the original sale contract, all legal, all notarized. Did you sell it under duress or confusion? No, ma'am. I sold it out of clarity. Have you experienced any mental decline, confusion, or inability to manage your finances? I smiled slightly. Not yet, though this nonsense might give me a headache. Laughter rippled softly across the courtroom. Even the judge's lips curved a little. When Anne was done, Sterling stood. Mr. Whitman, isn't it true that you've been living alone, isolating yourself, avoiding your daughter? I've been avoiding thieves, I said. There's a difference, he stiffened. Do you think it's normal for a 72-year-old man to handle complex finances alone? Normal, I said. Maybe not. But I've been teaching logic for 40 years. I know numbers better than your accountant. He pressed on, but it didn't matter. The judge was already done listening. You could see it in her eyes. She'd made up her mind long before the closing arguments. 30 minutes later, Judge Monroe returned with her ruling. Her voice was firm, measured, and mercifully simple. Having reviewed the psychological evaluation from Dr. Lowe and the supporting documentation from Mr. Whitman's legal counsel, the court finds no evidence of mental incapacity or cognitive decline. The petition for conservatorship is hereby denied with prejudice. She paused, eyes flicking toward Laura. Furthermore, the submission of falsified medical documentation is a serious matter. This court recommends the district attorney review that document for potential fraud charges. Laura's mouth fell open. Eric looked like someone had yanked the floor from under him. The judge turned back to me. Mr. Whitman, I know this has been painful. Families often lose their way when money blinds them. But you've shown exceptional composure and clarity. Her tone softened just a little. You are free to live your life, sir. On your own terms. She struck the gavel once. The echo filled the room like a thunderclap of justice. As I walked out, sunlight hit my face through the courthouse windows. Anne clapped my shoulder, smiling. Told you we'd make it out alive. Dr. Lowe nodded. Proud of you, Harold. I didn't answer for a while. I just stood there breathing. Because the judge didn't just save my rights that day. She gave me back my name. The courtroom victory didn't taste like triumph. It tasted like ash. People congratulated me. And Dr. Lowe, even the bailiff who held the door on my way out. You showed them, they said. But the truth was simpler, quieter, and far more bitter. I hadn't shown anyone anything. I had just proven what I already knew, that love and loyalty don't always grow in the same soil. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The air smelled like salt and memory. I made coffee, sat by the window of my condo, and stared out at the sea. The light came slow and soft, the kind of light Evelyn used to love, when she'd whisper, "The world looks gentler," before people start talking. I hadn't heard from Laura since the verdict. Not a call, not a message, not even anger, just silence. And that silence hurt worse than her lies. I thought about calling her. I even picked up the phone once. But what would I say? Hi, honey. Sorry. The law didn't let you steal from me. There are no Hallmark cards for that kind of fatherhood. I spent that afternoon cleaning my apartment, the quiet kind of cleaning that turns into thinking. Every drawer I opened had some echo from a life that used to be full. A drawing from when Laura was stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. Her handwriting blocky and proud, me and Daddy in our garden. God, she loved that garden. She'd kneel next to Evelyn in the dirt planting roses that never grew straight. When she was 10, she told me she wanted to be the lady who makes the flowers live forever. Now, she was the woman who'd tried to bury me alive in legal paperwork. Life has a cruel sense of symmetry. That night, I pulled out an old photo album. Evelyn was on the first page, our wedding picture. She was smiling at me, the way only a woman who hasn't yet learned about mortgages and medical bills can smile. And beneath that photo, tucked behind the plastic sleeve, was a faded note she once wrote after Laura's first birthday. Harold, when people show you their greed, believe them. I had laughed when she said that years ago, thinking it was cynicism. Now it sounded like scripture. She'd always been better at seeing through people than I was. I saw potential where she saw warning signs. I believed in the word family like it was armor, when really it's just skin, easy to pierce, slow to heal. A week after the hearing, Linda stopped by with groceries and a warm pie. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't need to. "You holding up?" she asked, setting the pie down. Define holding up. You're breathing, drinking coffee, and not arrested. I'll count that as progress. I smiled. Some victory. She sat opposite me, hands wrapped around her cup. You did what you had to. You protected yourself. Yeah, I said. But at what cost? Her eyes softened. You didn't push her away, Harold. She walked. I nodded. I knew she was right. But the truth still hurt like a bad tooth, dull, constant, impossible to ignore. After she left, I sat alone staring at the empty chair where Laura used to sit when she'd come by for dinner. Funny, I could still picture her there laughing at my old man jokes, stealing fries off my plate. Before the greed, before the husband, before the inheritance that wasn't hers yet. Before she started calling me Harold instead of Dad. People think you lose your children in court. They imagine a gavel comes down and cuts the bond clean. But it doesn't work that way. You lose them slowly. One ignored call, One lie that goes unchallenged. One "I'm too busy, Dad" that turns into a year. By the time you're sitting across from them in a courtroom, the real loss already happened in all the years they stopped listening. That night, I went down to the beach behind the condo. The tide was low, the sand cool under my bare feet. I stood there watching the horizon, where the water swallowed the last of the light. For the first time, I didn't think about revenge or justice or even forgiveness. I thought about peace and how damn expensive it can be. Some people spend their lives earning it through prayer. Others, like me, buy it with the price of losing what they love most. I tilted my head back, closed my eyes, and whispered into the wind, "Evelyn, you were right again. I just wish you weren't." The waves rolled in, slow and steady, as if the ocean itself was answering. And somewhere, maybe in the dark stretch of sky between memory and mercy, I hoped my daughter would one day remember me not as the man who beat her in court, but as the father who once carried her to school through the rain. Because the truth was simple, and it burned quietly in my chest. You don't really lose your children in court. You lose them long before, when they stop listening. The sea had become my clock. Every morning it whispered me awake, with the rhythm of waves brushing the shore, steady, patient, forgiving. I'd sit on my balcony, coffee in hand, the salt air cutting through my lungs like truth, and think, so this is what peace sounds like. It wasn't the kind of peace you find in silence. It was the kind that comes after the storm, when the wreckage has settled and you realize you are still standing. The condo was small, just 2 rooms and a balcony big enough for a few flower pots and a wooden chair. But it felt alive. Linda had helped me hang up new curtains. Anne had sent a small bookshelf as a gift, said it was time my stories had company. And I'd started something I hadn't done in 3 decades, gardening again. It started with one pot, a stubborn rose cutting I'd rescued from the old house before selling it. The first week, I watered it every morning like a ritual. The second week, I added basil, then thyme, then 2 tomato plants that never quite stood straight, but tried their best like me. One morning, as I was trimming the dead leaves, someone called up from the street below. Mr. Whitman. It was Megan, the young volunteer who ran a local senior program at the community center. She couldn't have been more than 27, freckles, messy ponytail, the kind of bright energy that reminded me the world wasn't all cynicism and invoices. "I brought you some new soil and a few seed packets," she said, climbing the steps to my balcony, like she'd done it all her life. "You're turning into our resident gardener." "Careful," I said. "I might start charging admission." She laughed, setting down the bag. "You joke, but everyone's asking about your little garden. You've inspired half the retirees to start balcony farming." I raised an eyebrow. "Retirees? You make us sound like an endangered species." She grinned. "Maybe you are, but the good kind. The kind that still teaches the rest of us how to live." It was Megan's idea that I start teaching. "You used to teach writing, right?" she asked one afternoon, watering my roses. "I did. Before. Well, before life got in the way." "Then get back to it," she said. "We're running a free workshop for older adults. Most of them just need someone to listen and maybe teach them to find their own words." At first I said no, but 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in a small classroom above the library, a dozen people waiting, notebooks open, eyes bright with nervous excitement. They called me Mr. Harold, like school kids again. We talked about memories, the kind you keep, the kind you let go. We wrote about lost loves, old regrets, and the strange quiet of growing older. And somewhere between their stories and mine, I realized I was writing again too. Each night, I'd come home and fill a few pages, fragments of the life I'd lived, the mistakes I'd survived, the lessons Evelyn used to whisper when the world got cruel. I called it The House I Let Go. It started as words, but one evening, Megan found me painting instead. "You paint too?" she asked, surprised. I looked at the half-finished canvas. A small wooden house under a gray sky, its windows glowing faintly, as if holding on to warmth that refused to die. "Not really," I said. "I just needed to see it one last time." She smiled softly. "It's beautiful. It's everything I lost," I said quietly, "and everything I found." Some nights when the tide came in loud and the air turned cold, I'd sit out there with a blanket, watching the lights from the fishing boats. I didn't miss the house anymore. I missed what it meant: family, love, safety, but not the bricks, not the weight. Because here above the sea, life was simple. I didn't have to defend anything. I didn't have to prove I was still strong or sane or useful. I could just be. Megan visited often, sometimes to help with the garden, sometimes just to talk. She'd tell me about her mother's health, about dating in the age of phone apps. A horror show, she said, about how she envied how calm I always seemed. I told her calm wasn't peace. It was just experience pretending to be wisdom. She laughed and called me the philosopher gardener. Maybe she was right. One Sunday I finished the painting. I signed my name in the corner, the first time I'd done that in 30 years. I hung it above my desk beside a photo of Evelyn, holding Laura as a baby. And as the morning light hit the canvas, I realized something. Freedom doesn't always look like youth. Sometimes it looks like an old man, watering roses alone, quiet, content, and finally, his own person again. A full year passed before I heard from her again. The mail came mid-morning, bills, a flyer for discounted hearing aids, and one colored envelope with my name written in looping familiar handwriting. Laura Whitman. For a long while I just held it. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it carried a piece of the past I wasn't sure I wanted back. Finally, I slid it open with a butter knife and began to read. "Dad, I don't know how to start this. I've written and torn up this letter 3 times already. I know you don't owe me anything, not an explanation, not forgiveness. But I need to say I'm sorry. I was angry and stupid and scared. Eric made me believe you didn't know what you were doing, that you were slipping away. I let greed sound like concern. And I hate myself for it. We're struggling right now. Eric lost his job. The kids need new uniforms and the rent's overdue. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. Just a little help, Dad. Not for me, for them. If you can't, I'll understand. I just hope wherever you are, you're happy. Love, Laura." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it beside my coffee. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I didn't even feel anger anymore. Just a long, quiet ache, the kind that comes from remembering something beautiful that no longer fits in your life. For a moment, I almost reached for a pen. Almost. Then I looked out the window. The morning light was spilling across the balcony, touching the rose plant that refused to stop blooming. It looked stubborn, defiant, even alive in its own small way. So I left the letter where it was. No reply, no check, no second chance to reopen an old wound that had finally scarred over. Some things you forgive in silence. Others, you just release to the wind. That evening, I walked along the Charleston shoreline. The tide was low, the sky painted in fire gold, melting into orange, then fading into the soft purple of dusk. I walked slow, the sand cold under my bare feet, the ocean murmuring its old gospel beside me. People passed, couples, joggers, a boy flying a kite, all moving toward something. I wasn't moving toward anything. I was within it, the calm, the rhythm, the strange grace of surviving yourself. The sea breeze tugged at the edges of the manuscript I carried, pages from my memoir, still in progress. The title scrawled across the first page read, "The Dignity of Letting Go." I'd written those words one night, After realizing that losing everything you thought defined you can be the only way to discover what actually does. I stopped near the waterline and looked out at the horizon. The waves broke softly, each one erasing the footprints before it. I thought about Evelyn, how she'd warned me years ago, Harold, when people show you their greed, believe them. I finally did. And for once, believing hadn't made me bitter. It had made me free. I whispered to the wind, as if she might still be listening. I didn't lose my home. I reclaimed myself. They wanted my walls. I kept my soul. A pelican swept low across the surf wings, catching the last gold light of the day. Behind me, the breeze lifted the top page of my manuscript and turned it gently, as though the story wanted to move forward on its own. I smiled. It's never too late to start over, even if the first thing you rebuild is yourself. You know, people think revenge is loud courtroom victories, angry words slam doors. But the sweetest kind is quiet. Mine came in the sound of the ocean outside my window, in the peace of waking up every morning knowing no one owns a single piece of me anymore. I didn't lose my daughter that year. I just finally saw who she'd become. And maybe that's what life is after 70. Not chasing what left, but protecting what's still yours. Your mind, your dignity, your soul. So if you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, hear me when I say this. It's never too late to take back your peace. Now tell me, in the comments, if this were your life, would you forgive, or would you finally let go?